Today we're tackling, well, maybe the biggest question there is consciousness. Where does it actually come from?
We're looking at some fascinating neurological work that really challenges a long-held idea, basically a 150-year-old assumption that consciousness lives exclusively in the cerebral cortex.
Right, the big wrinkly part associated with intelligence. But this new perspective is quite radical, isn't it? It forces us to think differently.
Completely. And it starts with a fundamental riddle. Can you even picture the world before consciousness evolved, before there was any subjective experience?
That's the classic hard problem, yeah. We see the brain activity, the neurons firing, but why does it feel like something to be us? Why is there experience at all?
Exactly. And the core argument we're digging into today is that consciousness isn't this high-level cognitive thing that came late in evolution. It's actually much more primitive,
Older than intelligence itself.
much older. And it arises not from the cortex, but from a much deeper, older part of the brain. Some call it the hidden spring.
And this core consciousness is fundamentally about feeling.
Feeling, raw affect. And its basic job, evolutionarily speaking, is pretty simple: to help you stay alive, to do better. It's a survival metric.
Okay, let's unpack that. First, we have to challenge what the source material calls the cortical fallacy. The idea that the cortex must be the seat of consciousness.
Yet for decades, maybe centuries, it seemed obvious. Look at the size, the complexity of the cortex. Where else would it be? It's where we think, reason, plan.
Seems logical. But then there's this clinical evidence that just doesn't fit, particularly the work by Bjorn Merker with children who have hydranencephaly.
Right. Hydranencephaly is a condition where infants are born essentially without a cerebral cortex. Their skulls are mostly filled with cerebrospinal fluid instead of the forebrain.
And the standard cortical theory would predict but
Yeah.
a vegetative state?
Precisely. They should only have basic autonomic functions like breathing, heart rate. Unresponsive.
But Merker observes something very different.
Very different. He described these children as being awake, alert. They showed clear emotional responses: pleasure, aversion, smiling, crying, reaching for things. They seemed aware.
Aware, even without a cortex.
They showed intentional behavior, responding to music, engaging with toys, showing preferences. If consciousness requires a cortex, these children should be like philosophical zombies appearing functional, but with no inner light.
They weren't.
Their behavior strongly suggested some form of subjective experience, some kind of feeling driving their actions. This implies the cortex isn't the necessary source for basic consciousness.
Okay, but playing devil's advocate here, could those behaviors, the smiling, the crying, just be incredibly complex reflexes housed in the brainstem? How do we know it's subjective feeling?
That's a fair question. The key difference seems to be the flexibility and the goal-directed nature. Reflexes are rigid. These kids showed context-dependent behavior, even learning. For example, deliberately kicking a mobile to make it jingle. That's not just a reflex, it's exploratory. It's seeking behavior, driven by some kind of internal state or goal. It implies feeling.
And this points to the idea that the cortex, our huge processing powerhouse, is actually doing something else most of the time.
Exactly. The vast majority of what the cortex does, processing vision, understanding language, recognizing faces, even complex decision-making, it all happens unconsciously.
So reading this text, recognizing my own face, that's mostly automatic.
Mostly automatic. The cortex is like this incredibly powerful prediction machine running largely in the background. It only makes things conscious when it needs to, when something unexpected happens.
Okay, so if the cortex is mainly running on autopilot and isn't the source of raw awareness, where is that feeling, that subjective, what it's like actually coming from?
This is where the core assertion comes in. Consciousness, in its most basic form, is affect, raw feeling. As Mark Solms puts it, whoever heard of a feeling that has no subjective quality? They're basically the same thing,
Feeling is consciousness at its root.
at its very root. And this root is located in a much more ancient part of the brain,
How ancient.
shared with basically all vertebrates, maybe even fish. It's deep in the brainstem, specifically a structure called the periaqueductal gray, or PAG.
The peg. Okay. What's special about the peg?
It seems to be the final common pathway, the bottleneck, for all the brain circuits that generate affect or basic emotions. It integrates all these drives.
And the clinical evidence here is strong, too.
Very precise. Tiny lesions, damage specifically to the PAG, can result in a complete loss of all purposeful behavior, essentially a vegetative state, even if the cortex is intact and sleep-wake cycles continue.
Wow. So damage there switches consciousness off.
It seems to wipe out the capacity for subjective experience for feeling, whereas you can have massive damage to the cortex, huge parts removed, and basic effective consciousness can still remain.
So we need to differentiate between like automatic bodily functions, breathing, heart rate, temperature, the vegetative stuff, which are unfelt needs,
Right, those are handled unconsciously.
and the felt needs, the drives, the effects. When a need becomes felt, it makes a demand.
It makes a demand for work, for action. It signals urgency.
And this ties into Jack Panksepp's work on basic emotions.
Exactly. Panksepp identified 7 core emotional systems, instinctual drives, that are wired into these ancient subcortical circuits in all mammals. They show how fundamental feeling is to survival.
7 core drives. Can we quickly run through them?
Sure. The first, and maybe the default, is seeking. This is like Freud's libido, but broader. It's curiosity, interest, enthusiasm, the drive to explore, to engage, to find resources.
Okay, seeking. What else?
Then you have the more obvious survival ones.
Mhm.
Ella est, for reproduction. Fear, for learning what's dangerous. Rage, the response to being thwarted or attacked.
Makes sense.
And panic grief. That's the distress of separation, especially maternal separation. It's thought to be the root of social bonds and also depression.
That's 5. What are the last 2?
Care, which is a nurturing instinct, like maternal care driven by hormones. And finally, play.
Play as a fundamental drive.
Absolutely crucial. It's not just for fun. Play, especially rough and tumble play, is how young mammals learn social rules, test boundaries, figure out. Panksepp talked about a kind of 60.40 rule where you have to let the other guy win sometimes to keep the game going. It's serious biological business.
So these 7 feelings are the basic engine wired deep below the cortex.
They're the ancient motivators, pushing us to do what's needed for survival and social living.
And this connects somehow to physics. That seems like a leap. How does feeling relate to the laws of the universe?
It sounds like a leap, but it's about survival against entropy. The second law of thermodynamics says things tend towards disorder, towards dissipating energy. Living things have to constantly work to resist this, to maintain themselves within a very narrow range of ordered states homeostasis.
Right, staying alive means fighting disorder, and this connects to something called the free energy principle, FEP.
It does. The FEP is a complex idea, but basically it suggests that any self-organizing system that wants to stay in its preferred states, like a living organism, must act to minimize uncertainty, or what physicists call surprisal.
Surprisal, like unexpected events, things the system didn't predict.
Exactly. Unexpected events are bad from the system's point of view because they signal that its model of the world is wrong, and being wrong can lead to danger, to moving outside those viable states. Minimizing surprisal means minimizing prediction error.
Okay, I think I see the link now. Minimizing prediction error. Is that where feeling comes in?
That's precisely the argument. Affects feelings are the way the system registers prediction errors that are too important, too biologically significant to ignore or handle unconsciously.
So if my body expects a certain temperature and suddenly it's way off, that error signal isn't just data, it's felt as discomfort or cold or heat.
Yes. The feeling is the subjective registration of that urgent prediction error. Consciousness in this view is fundamentally the feeling of uncertainty about meeting biological needs.
So all our complex thoughts, worries, plans, they're ultimately guided by these basic ancient feelings signaling something's not right or something needs attention.
That's the idea. Think about the sheep example Solms uses. He's jogging in the dark. The sheep see an unexpected dark shape moving quickly, massive surprisal. Their system flags it as a high-priority error, triggering fear, and they flee.
But then later, in daylight,
An hour later, same jogger, same sheep, but it's bright daylight. Now the jogger fits their predictive model better. Less surprisal, they might look up, maybe, but they stay in seeking mode, grazing. Context changes the prediction, changes the error, and thus changes the conscious feeling.
okay, so the brainstem, the PEG, sends up the urgent feeling alert based on prediction error. What's the cortex doing then? It must provide that context, right?
Exactly. The cortex provides the rich detail, the predictions, the virtual reality, uses its incredibly complex generative model of the world built on past experience to try and figure out what is causing the feeling and what to do about it. This is basically Bayesian inference.
So perception isn't just raw data coming in. It's the brain's best guess. It's prediction of what's out there.
Right. Think about binocular rivalry. If your eyes get conflicting images, you don't see a messy blend. The cortex forces you to perceive one prediction then the other. It hates contradictory hypotheses.
And the cortex only becomes consciously involved when the brainstem signals urgent update needed.
Pretty much. The brainstem's reticular activating system, the RAS, sends neuromodulators like dopamine and acetylcholine up to the cortex. This is arousal. It doesn't just wake the cortex up, it makes the currently relevant cortical circuits, the memories, the predictions, labile.
Labile, meaning unstable, changeable.
Exactly. Changeable, ready to be updated. The brainstem basically says, okay, cortex, pay attention. This prediction was wrong. Make this memory trace unstable so we can fix it based on this new feeling, this new error signal.
So consciousness in the cortex is like the process of updating the model.
It's the temporary state of instability needed for learning and updating. And the ultimate goal, ironically, is to reduce the need for consciousness.
To make things automatic again.
Yes. To refine the predictions so they become highly accurate, highly certain. To minimize surprisal. The brain wants to achieve a state of low-energy, effortless prediction, a kind of zombiedom, where everything is expected and therefore nothing needs to be felt urgently.
Like sensory fading. If I stare at something unchanging, it disappears from my awareness.
Perfect example. If a stimulus is perfectly predictable, it generates no error signal, no surprisal. The brain essentially says, nothing new here, no need to waste energy feeling this, and it fades from consciousness.
Which brings us back to memory reconsolidation. Memories only become conscious again when we retrieve them.
When they're retrieved or aroused, yes, they become labile again, temporarily conscious, so they can be potentially updated with new information linked to the current state of need, the current feeling being signaled by the brainstem.
So consciousness is the work-in-progress state aimed at creating better unconscious habits and predictions.
Precisely. It's the feeling that drives the updating of the predictive model so we can navigate the world more effectively and automatically next time.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this for everyone listening. The core argument is consciousness isn't primarily thinking, it's feeling. This raw feeling comes from the ancient brainstem, the PEG, signaling urgent biological prediction errors uncertainty.
Right, and the cortex. Its job is to use its vast predictive power and memory systems to make sense of that feeling, figure out the context, and guide actions to resolve the uncertainty, to satisfy the need.
Brainstem provides the why, the urgent feeling. Cortex provides the what and how, the detailed model and the plan.
A good way to put it. And this view helps bridge that explanatory gap, the hard problem. Instead of seeing brain events and subjective feelings as totally separate things, we see them as two aspects of the same underlying process.
Like lightning and thunder, two different manifestations of one electrical discharge.
Exactly. One is the objective, physical description. The other is the subjective experience of that same process unfolding.
It's an elegant framework, but how could we ever prove it? This leads to the really provocative final idea in the source material, engineering consciousness.
Yes. Solms argues that the only way to truly test this hypothesis, to potentially falsify it, is to try and build it, to create artificial consciousness, or AC.
But not just any AI, not just a bigger language model or prediction machine.
No. He predicts you'd need to build a system that is 1, embodied, 2, self-organizing, and critically, 3, driven by the need to minimize its own uncertainty across multiple, often conflicting biological-type needs. It has to care about its own survival within an unpredictable environment.
It needs to feel the consequences of being wrong, to have something at stake.
Precisely. It needs to prioritize flexibly between different needs based on urgency optimizing precision, as Carl Friston might say. If such a system can successfully navigate a complex world by minimizing its prediction errors based on these intrinsic needs,
Then Solms predicts it will generate effect. It will have subjective feelings, genuine uncertainty.
that's the prediction. He says, unless and until we engineer consciousness, based on these principles of feeling, need, and uncertainty, we cannot be confident that we have solved the problem. It's the ultimate empirical test.
Wow, that's quite a challenge to the field. So the final thought here is that our feelings, fear, joy, curiosity, grief, aren't just some fuzzy byproduct of intellect.
Not at all. They are, as Solms calls it, a precious inheritance. They ground our sophisticated cortical predictions in the fundamental life and death realities of survival, learned over eons.
That feeling tells us what matters, what to do next.
It's the value system that makes intelligence meaningful and adaptive. It's why we strive, why we learn, why we're here.
An incredible perspective shift. Thanks for guiding us through that intricate landscape.
My pleasure. It certainly makes you think about experience differently.
It does indeed. That's all for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.